is we will have a writing assignment this week. I may push it to Saturday night, just to give you guys an extra day. Paper though on the Inferno, so we're going to be starting this book today. So your response paper should be based on the parts that we get through this week. Again, find something, pick something that you found interesting about the book that jumped out to you. And tell me about your thoughts about it. You shouldn't need to refer to any other sources on this. If you want to, connect it to something in the Odyssey, that'd be fine, or something in a poem that you're familiar with, that'd be fine. When you're referring to the Inferno, the text of this is actually very short, and it's poetry. So we want to be working pretty closely with the text. So, quote from the text, tell me where it comes from. Tell me the canto number. Remember, canto is like book for the Odyssey or chapter, and the verse. So quote the poem and cite quotes, some characters, some themes, some other aspect of it that you find interesting. Otherwise, the guidelines are pretty much the same. The Genesis 41 through 50 questions I'll check tomorrow. The Genesis 41 through 50 questions.
Is not today?
I don't remember what I had said last week, but I'll check them tomorrow. That sheet is on Jupyter Grades if you need it. If you need those questions, that's up there. So Genesis 41 through 50 questions tomorrow. Response paper. Let's say Saturday for that. So I'll move it to the 5th, Saturday the 5th that night. But please don't move it to Saturday. Let me do that right now before I forget about it. I didn't. Okay, I'll put those in. Just remind me at the end. I'll put those in. I will get to grading the creative writings. Sorry that I haven't gotten to that yet. Those of you who have not yet turned that in, please do that as soon as possible, because it's the biggest grade right now, the things that are in. And so if you've got a missing, it's really hurting your grade. Out, and you can recite for me. Next up is review questions for Canto 1 of the Inferno. We should be able to read all of Canto 1 today. Hopefully, these are also posted on Jupyter. These will be due probably Friday. We will not quite finish Canto 1 today. Here are the review questions for you. And then we should be able to get started with Dante. So remember that here at the Inferno, we're talking about the first part of Dante's work, the Divine Comedy, with his spiritual journey, taking him through hell, purgatory, and heaven, in that order. 100 cantos in the whole thing, 34 in Inferno, 33 in Purgatory and Paradise. But the very first canto that we're going to read today is that 34th canto of Inferno. Makes the number a bit over. Really, it's more of an introduction to the whole work, not just Inferno. So really, the Inferno is 1 plus 3, and then 33 and 33. So that's how it's broken down, these 100 cantos. These numbers are very important in this work. The time period that Dante's living in, where we're transitioning from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, for both of those time periods, but especially the Middle Ages, numbers are extremely important. So pay attention. When Dante gives you numbers, there's some significance there. So if you turn to page 60, well, actually, yeah, there's a lot of good introductory material in the book, which you're welcome to read if you want. But start out by turning to page 67, Canto 1. You'll see this map there of the world that Dante describes here in the Inferno. This is as good an example as any that this myth that you hear about people think that the world was flat in the Middle Ages is just completely false. People have known the Earth was round like a ball since the ancient world. The Greeks and the Romans already knew that. And for Dante here, notice how hell is this pit that goes from just under the surface of the earth all the way down to the very center, with Jerusalem right above
hell and the mountain of purgatory on the other side. And the mountain of purgatory is what Dante climbs up in this. But there's useful information that's given to you in this book that it's worth paying attention to. At the beginning of each canto, so often you'll have illustrations, and the maps in particular I think are helpful for getting the visual here. These are not original, these are added in by the editors to help you understand it. But there's a summary of each canto there. So if you want to get an idea of what's going to happen, read those, and we will generally read them together. Then there's the text of the canto. You notice the text is broken into these 3-line sections. That's how it's written, this form terza rima that Dante wrote in. And notice there's only about 140 lines of text here. And then on page 71, right after that, we have notes. Some of the notes are about groups of lines. So the first note is about lines 1 through 10. Then there's a note about line 1, 8 to 9. These notes are really important. If there's something that doesn't make sense to you, if there's a name that's unfamiliar to you, make a mental note of the line number and check the notes, because there's probably an explanation there. If there isn't, then ask me about it, and we can talk about that. All right. So let's start here with Canto 1. I'll read the little summary here first. Sometimes you see this labeled, especially in older books, as the argument. Just a summary of this section. So, halfway through his life, Dante the pilgrim wakes to find himself in a dark wood. Terrified at being alone in so dismal a valley, he wanders until he comes to a hill bathed in sunlight, and his fear begins to leave him. But when he starts to climb the hill, his path is blocked by 3 fierce beasts. First a leopard, then a lion, and finally a she-wolf. They fill him with fear and drive him back down to the sunless wood. At that moment, the figure of a man appears before him. It is the shade of Virgil, and the pilgrim begs for help. Virgil tells him that he cannot overcome the beasts which obstruct his path. They must remain until a greyhound comes who will drive them back to hell. Rather, by another path will the pilgrim reach the sunlight, and Virgil promises to guide him on that path through hell and purgatory, after which another spirit, more fit than Virgil, will lead him to paradise. The pilgrim begs Virgil to lead on, and the guide starts ahead. The pilgrim follows. The pilgrim. What's a pilgrim? What's a pilgrimage?
Pilgrim?
What's a pilgrim?
Another type of. I'm not a traveler. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Can you tell me anything about what's a pilgrim?
They like.
Okay, we just had Thanksgiving, so yeah, the pilgrims you're thinking of are related to that. You know what? Tell me anything about a pilgrim. What's a pilgrim? A pilgrim is someone who makes a pilgrimage, a religious journey. The pilgrims, the Thanksgiving pilgrims, are called that because they left England for religious reasons and came in and settled in the New World in Massachusetts, or what became Massachusetts. But a pilgrim is one who goes on a religious journey. And the big religious journeys that you might go on in the Middle Ages, there were 3 of them. One is to the city of Rome, the center of the Christian world, and where the apostles Peter and Paul, the 2 most important apostles, where they died and where they were buried. The other one was to Canterbury. If you ever read the book The Canterbury Tales, is about a pilgrimage to the city of Canterbury. And the third one is to Jerusalem. Probably the most important, to Jerusalem. Why? What's important about Jerusalem? Why does Dante put Jerusalem? Notice, if we look at this map here, why is Jerusalem there in this position of prime importance? What's important about Jerusalem? What happened in Jerusalem? Yes. The site of Christ's death and resurrection. So Dante here, when we talk about Dante the Pilgrim, we mean the character Dante. Because there's also Dante the author, the real life person who wrote this book, but he makes himself one of the characters in here. So if we talk about Dante the Pilgrim, we're talking about the character who's making this journey. If we talk about Dante the author, we're talking about the guy who wrote it. They're not quite the same. Obviously, they're very connected, and Dante is basing this character off of himself and his own experience. But let's read here. Pause and ask some questions. Midway along the journey of our life, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, for I'd wandered off from the straight path. How hard it is to tell what it was like, this wood of wilderness, savage and stubborn. The thought of it brings back all my old fears. A bitter place. Death could scarce be bitterer. But if I would show the good that came of it, I must talk about things other than the good. How I entered there, I cannot truly say. I had become so sleepy at the moment when I first strayed, leaving the path of truth. But when I found myself at the foot of a hill, at the edge of the wood's beginning, down in the valley, where I first felt my heart plunge deep in fear, I raised my head and saw the hilltop shawled in morning rays of light sent from the planet that leads men straight ahead on every road. And then only did terror start subsiding in my heart's lake, which rose to heights of fear that night I spent in deepest desperation. Where, does he say there, right in the first couple of lines? In a wood. What's this wood, this forest? What does it look like? It's dark. And why is Dante there? Why is the pilgrim there in this wood? How did he get there?
Did he run away from his city?
Not by running away.
He got lost.
He got lost. He says, I don't know how I got there. I had wandered off from the straight path. There's no path. It's dark. He's frightened. He says in line 10, how I entered there I cannot truly say. And then what does he see in line 13? What does he see? Right. He says, I found myself at the foot of a hill, at the edge of the wood's beginning. And what does this hill look like? I raised my head and saw shawled in. Shawled means wrapped, like wrapped with a scarf. He sees the top of the hill, but what does it look like? Bright hilltop. And he says, and then only did terror start subsiding. My fear then started to sink down. Only then, when I saw this hilltop. Continuing line 22. Just as a swimmer, still with panting breath, now safe upon the shore out of the deep, might turn for one last look at the dangerous waters, so I, although my mind was turned to flee, turned round to gaze once more upon the past that never let a living soul escape. I rested my tired body there a while, and then began to climb the barren slope. I dragged my stronger foot and limped along. Beyond the point the slope begins to rise, sprang up a leopard, trim and very swift. It was covered by a pelt of many spots. And everywhere I looked, the beast was there, blocking my way. So time and time again, I was about to turn and go back down. So he starts to climb up the hill. But what happens? Yes, what's this beast that he sees? A leopard, yes. He sees a leopard, and what's the leopard doing?
Is that outside?
In a leopard, yeah. What's the leopard doing? How does this affect Dante? He sees this leopard as he starts to climb up the hill. And everywhere I looked,
Blocking his way.
the beast was there blocking my way. It's stopping him from going up the hill, yes. The hour was early in the morning then, line 37. The sun was climbing up with those same stars that had accompanied it on the world's first day, the day divine love set their beauty turning. So the hour and sweet season of creation encouraged me to think I could get past that gaudy beast, wild in its spotted pelt. But then good hope gave way and fear returned when the figure of a lion loomed up before me. And he was coming straight toward me, it seemed, with head raised high and furious with hunger. The air around him seemed to fear his presence. And now a she-wolf came, that in her leanness seemed racked with every kind of greediness. How many people she has brought to grief. This last beast brought my spirit down so low with fear that seized me at the sight of her, I lost all hope of going up the hill. As a man who, rejoicing in his gains, suddenly seeing his gain turned into loss, will grieve as he compares his then and now, so she made me do, that relentless beast, coming toward me slowly. Dante says early in the morning, the sun is coming up. The stars, he says, the stars are the same stars from the world's first day. March 25th, the date of creation, traditionally. He seems to be able to get past the leopard, but then what happens? What does he run into? A lion. So first he runs into the leopard, then the lion, and then after the lion there's a she-wolf. Yes, a female wolf. Right. Leopard, a lion, and a she-wolf that block his way. And so where does he go when he realizes he can't get past these three animals, these three beasts? He goes down. She forced me back, line 60, she forced me back to where the sun is mute, to where the sun is silent. What does that mean? The place where the sun is silent. Yeah, where it's dark, meaning the forest here. Line 61. While I was rushing down to that low place, my eyes made out a figure coming toward me, of one grown faint, perhaps from too much silence. And when I saw him standing in this wasteland, have pity on my soul, I cried to him, whichever you are, shade or living man. No longer living man, though once I was, he said. And my parents were from Lombardy. Both of them were Mantuans by birth. I was born, though somewhat late, sub Julio, and lived in Rome when good Augustus reigned, when still the false and lying gods were worshipped. I was a poet, and sang of that just man, son of Anchises, who sailed off from Troy after the burning of proud Ilium. Why retreat to so much misery? Why not climb up this blissful mountain here, the beginning and the source of all man's joy? I said to him, bowing my head modestly. O light and honor of the other poets, may my long years of study and that deep love that made me search your verses help me now. You are my teacher, the first of all my authors, and you alone, the one from whom I took the noble style that was to bring me honor. Dante heads down the hill after being blocked by these beasts, and whom does he run into?
I don't really know, but he said he used to be a man.
Yes, someone he says he used to be a man. Yes, notice Dante says that when he first sees him, he says, whichever you are, shade or living man. Shade means a ghost here. And so we learn that this is not a living person, this is a ghost, and it's the ghost of Virgil. Okay, Virgil. Who is Virgil?
He was somebody that came from Troy.
Troy is connected to this.
I don't think it's
Okay, so here he says, my parents were from Lombardy. Both of them were Mantuans by birth. Virgil was born in a city called Mantua. What else does Virgil tell us about himself in lines 70 through 72? What does he tell us in that bit there, those three lines? What else do we learn about Virgil? Lines 70, 71, and 72. Say it again.
He lived in Rome.
He lived in Rome when?
When Augustus reigned.
Yes, who's Augustus? Augustus? No, not Augustine. Different guy. Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The beginning of the Roman Empire. So he lived in Rome during the reign of Augustus. And what else happened at that time in line 72? When what?
When they believe the gods, like Zeus.
Right. He says when still the false and lying gods were worshipped, when they still believed in these pagan gods of Rome. It's before Christianity. And then he says, I was a poet and sang of that just man, son of Anchises, after the burning of proud Ilium. Ilium is Troy.
So Virgil's son is the son of...
No, he says he sang of the just man, who's the son of Anchises.
Oh.
So Virgil, he's a Roman poet, and his claim to fame is he wrote this poem called the Aeneid, which is an epic like the Odyssey and the Iliad. And here, the way that the Odyssey tells the story of Odysseus, the Aeneid tells the story of a man named Aeneas, Aeneas, who's a Trojan prince who, when Troy is destroyed at the end of the Trojan War, takes his father Anchises and his family, and he sails around the Mediterranean and then eventually founds the city of Rome. This is the work that Virgil wrote. It's the most important work of ancient Roman literature. And Virgil's the author. The most important work, the story of Aeneas, son of Anchises, who left Troy when it was burned and founded the city of Rome.
Is that Aeneas?
Yes. That's who Virgil is. And why does Dante care about Virgil? Besides the fact that he bumps into him here in this wood. Virgil's a poet. So is Dante. They share that in common. Why else? Why Virgil in particular? Why is he more important than some other poet whom Dante might have bumped into? Why does Dante say that he's glad to see Virgil there in particular? I'm sorry? He says, "You are my teacher, the first of all my authors, and you alone, the one from whom I took the noble style that was to bring me honor." Now, Virgil lived about 1,300 years before Dante, not literally his teacher, but he says, "You're the one that I got my style from. My poetry is inspired by you." All right. And let's see what else we hear in this conversation between Virgil and Dante. These are the two main characters of the Inferno. Dante, the pilgrim, this Renaissance poet who's wandering after being lost in this wood, and Virgil, the Roman poet, whom we've seen Dante already call his guide. He's going to show him the way through hell. Dante says to Virgil in line 88, which we'll pick up from, he says, "You see the beast that forced me to retreat? Save me from her. I beg you, famous sage. She makes me tremble. The blood throbs in my veins." "But you must journey down another road," he answered, when he saw me lost in tears, "if ever you hope to leave this wilderness. This beast, the one you cry about in fear, allows no soul to succeed along her path. She blocks his way and puts an end to him. She is by nature so perverse and vicious, her craving belly is never satisfied, still hungering for food the more she eats. She mates with many creatures and will go on mating with more until the greyhound comes and tracks her down to make her die in anguish. He will not feed on either land or money. His wisdom, love, and virtue shall sustain him. He will be born between Feltro and Feltro. He comes to save that fallen Italy for which the maid Camilla gave her life, and Turnus, Nisus, Euryalus died of wounds. And he will hunt for her through every city until he drives her back to hell once more, whence envy first unleashed her on mankind. And so I think it best you follow me for your own good. And I shall be your guide and lead you out through an eternal place where you will hear desperate cries and see tormented shades, some old as hell itself, and know what second death is from their screams." What does Virgil tell Dante about this wolf, specifically, that's blocking his path? We'll learn about the wolf. Anyone? What does Virgil tell us about the wolf here?
She eats a lot.
She eats a lot. Yes, she's always hungry.
She mates a lot.
She always right. He says you can't. You have to wait until the greyhound comes and tracks her down to make her die in anguish. The greyhound. What's a greyhound? Don't say the bus.
A big dog.
Yeah, it's a type of dog used for hunting. They run very quickly. And so that's part of this. We'll talk a little bit about the symbolism once we finish the canto. The greyhound, yes. Yeah, greyhound is a type of dog. Like if you see the logo on the side of the greyhound buses, there's that silver dog on the side. They're very tall and skinny, and they run extremely quickly. A greyhound? Nope. Nope. It's a type of dog. Ask the wolf, how are you going to have to continue? Says, I think it best you follow me for your own good. And what? Where is Virgil going to bring him?
Eternal place.
Yes, through an eternal place. Oh, an eternal place. That sounds good, right? Heaven's eternal, right?
Well, you could be eternal.
Ah, yes, an eternal place where you will hear desperate cries and see tormented shades, some as old as hell itself, and know what second death is from their screams, not just the death of the body, but also the death of the soul. Yes, he's going to bring him down through hell. Line 118, then he continues, and later you will see those who rejoice while they are burning, for they have hope of coming whenever it may be to join the blessed, to whom, if you too wish to make the climb, a spirit worthier than I must take you. I shall go back, leaving you in her care, because that emperor dwelling on high will not let me lead any to his city, since I in life rebelled against his law. Everywhere he reigns, and there he rules. There is his city, there is his high throne. Well, happy the one he makes his citizen. And I said to him, Poet, I beg of you, in the name of God, that God you never knew, save me from this evil place, and worse, lead me there, to the place you spoke about, that I may see the gate St. Peter guards, and those whose anguish you told me of. Then he moved on, and I moved close behind him. So Virgil first tells Dante in lines 114 to 117, I'm going to bring you through hell first, and then what's the next place Dante is going to go through? In lines 118 to 20. Those who rejoice while they are burning. They're glad while they're burning. Who's the second group here?
I move the souls. That's all I know.
So they're burning, but they're also happy, even though they're burning. For what? In line 119. Those who rejoice while they are burning for what?
Hey, John, if you're not going to use your book, you're trying to make it there?
Yes, they have hope of coming to join the blessed. The blessed being, who are the blessed? Who are the blessed ones? The ones in heaven, right? These other ones who are burning and happy, they have hope of joining the blessed. This is purgatory, where these souls are being burned to purify them from their sins. That's the second group that Dante will eventually make his journey through. Not that we're going to read about that. But he says also, if you too wish to make the climb, a spirit worthier than I must take you. I shall go back, leaving you in her care. Why is Virgil not going to be able to lead Dante all the way into heaven?
Because he can't. Because he has to do his own good? That is pretty good.
What does he say? That because what? Line 124.
Not that he won't go to heaven because he can go.
Right. Who's stopping him from going into heaven?
The emperor?
The emperor dwelling on high. Who's the emperor?
God.
Yeah, God. Why do you think Virgil calls him the emperor dwelling on high? Think about when Virgil lived.
Oh, yeah, we would never believe him.
Right. He was not Christian. He lived before. He died before Christ was born. He was a pagan, Roman pagan, and so the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor, in fact, actually starting with his uncle Julius Caesar, the emperors were often thought of, especially after their death, as being like gods, being divine. Divus, Julius, the divine Julius. Say it again? Not really a war so much as a series of persecutions. that eventually Roman paganism died out. It was replaced by Christianity. Yeah, so he calls God the emperor dwelling on high.
What, just because of the time frame we live in? That's what they call it.
Well, so he doesn't, Virgil, and we'll see this happen a lot, is that Virgil, as a pagan, he doesn't have knowledge and understanding of God and how everything works that Dante and that the reader might. He's blinded by his own ignorance here. So he thinks of God as the emperor dwelling on high. He rules there. He won't let me into his city. When he makes somebody a citizen of his city, that's great. Roman citizenship was a great thing to have. He's thinking of it in these political terms. And then Dante, notice, responds to him in lines 130 to 135. He says, "Poet, I beg of you, in the name of what? In the name of God, what? That God you never knew. I'm going to ask you in the name of God, even though you never knew him, to do what? To lead me there, to the place you spoke about." He doesn't name it. He doesn't call it hell. He says, "Lead me to that place you spoke about so that I may see the gate St. Peter guards, the gate of heaven, and those whose anguish you told me of, the people in purgatory." Then he moved on, and I moved close behind him. So here we have this introduction of the whole work. We meet Dante wandering in this wood. We meet Virgil, who's going to be his guide. We hear about the journey he's going to have to make. Because he cannot get up this hill, the hill in this map here at Jerusalem, where heaven is, he can't go up that. It's blocked. His way is blocked by these beasts. So he's going to have to go down through hell in order to make it there, to get around. Virgil will be his guide there. Let's talk briefly about these different animals that we see here. Everything in the Inferno, in addition to, or in the Divine Comedy in general, in addition to having its sort of literal meaning in terms of the plot, there's also some symbolic meaning to it. Dante is working on multiple levels here. The numbers have meaning. The animals have meaning. The people, there's a symbolism to all of this. The geography, there's a symbolic meaning behind all of it. Now, there are often different ways you can interpret it. Dante might have been thinking of different things there. Some things we know more about, some less. Sometimes he refers to obscure things from Italian politics. But let's talk about these three animals, the leopard, the lion, and the she-wolf, because they are often discussed here. If you look at page 73, we see there's a big note there about the three beasts here. And so everybody look at page 73 right now, the bottom half of the page where it says 32 to 60, that big note there. He says the early critics, so critics are people who thought of the three beasts that blocked the pilgrim's path as symbolizing three specific sins: lust, pride, and avarice. So the lion representing lust, the leopard representing lust, the lion, pride, and the she-wolf, avarice. These are three specific sins. So on the left here we've got the early critics. We don't need to talk about the right here. We've got the early critics here on the left. So this is sort of the traditional interpretation of this. And then we're also talking about how the translator Mark Musa, what he thinks these three beasts mean. So the traditional is the leopard symbolizes lust, the lion, pride, and the she-wolf, avarice. So pride, okay, I think pride's pretty straightforward. Yeah, what's avarice? Avarice, avaritia in Latin.
And you keep everything for yourself.
Yes, greed. Avarice is greed. And what about lust? What's lust?
I don't know, I feel like I should know this stuff.
Probably. These are three of the 7 deadly sins. The other 4 being sloth, wrath, gluttony, and okay, lust is no. We'll see the distinction very soon. Lust is improper sexual desire and misuse of the sexual faculties. shall we say. So lust covers that whole thing. The sins, any sins associated with misuse of sexuality falls under lust. So here, and then pride, being more of a spiritual aspect, and then avarice, having this sort of societal aspect to it. Obviously, three very serious, very common, very dangerous sins. Lying and pride definitely go together. The she-wolf, we read that she's always hungry. She always wants more. She's never satisfied. It's a good description of avarice. The leopard and lust connect. Mark Musa has a different interpretation of it. What he says is rather than symbolizing specific sins, they symbolize certain categories of sins. And these categories of sins line up with certain divisions of hell, because Dante's hell is very carefully divided into different sections, which we'll talk about. So Musa says that the leopard represents the sins of fraud, of deception, of lying and cheating. And that's the bottom section of hell. So there are a couple different ways to divide Dante's hell, but the bottom section, which Musa calls the sins of the leopard, is fraud. These are the worst sins being punished down at the bottom. The lion, he says, represents sins of violence. Lions are a violent animal, seems like a good pick for that. And so the sins of violence, which are in the middle section of hell, are more serious than the top section, but not as bad as fraud. Oh, there's not lunch. Thank you very much. And then the she-wolf, the last beast that he sees, representing the least serious sins, but it's also the one that Dante has no hope of getting past until the greyhound comes. The she-wolf, the top section, being sins of what we call concupiscence, which is another one of these words which we'll talk about what it means. So these are words that you should know what they mean. Yes, there's going to be a lot of sort of technical terminology about sin in here. Remember, this isn't just a nice story. Dante is telling us about sin and his experience with sin in here. So the leopard, representing the worst sins at the bottom of hell, sins of fraud, of deception. The lion, the middle section of hell, violence, less serious. And then the top, sins of concupiscence. Concupiscence means desire, especially desire that's too strong. So that would include things like lust, having too much or a disordered desire for sexual pleasure. Gluttony, having a disordered desire or pleasure in food. Greed can be a sort of a desire for money or for power. So these are sins of disordered desire. Now these are things that we want. We want these things because they're nice. It's nice to have friends. It's nice to have power. It's nice to have money. It's nice to have pleasure of various bodily kinds. But when they get disordered, they become sinful, and they easily get that way. The least bad of the sins, according to Dante. But also, notice this section of hell is the largest. There are the most people in this section. This largest section of hell. And that's the one, the she-wolf, these sins of desire that Dante can't fix on his own. Violence being more serious than those. Here, there's actual destruction, active destruction, rather than just wanting something that might otherwise be good. And then fraud, actually taking this whole thing and perverting it, where you're actively deceiving people and working against their interests. All right, so make sure you're familiar with these interpretations of these animals. Make sure you know what these various words mean, especially these three: fraud, violence, concupiscence. That distinction is going to be very important to keep in mind. I think it's a really helpful way to think of how Dante's hell is structured. Thank you very much. Don't forget poems. Don't forget review questions on Genesis through tomorrow. Let's say the Inferno 1 questions will be due Friday. Inferno 1 questions for the 4th. And the response paper moved to Saturday night. Thank you very much. Make sure you bring the Inferno tomorrow.